Hi there, everybody, and thanks for joining us down here today. You're joined with myself, Philip Boyden, and
Paul Buck
here at Boydens Estates Agents and Lettings. We've called this today as a bit of a special one-off because there's been quite a lot of fake news and just wrong press about what is going on with the Renters' Rights Bill, hasn't there, Paul? Really?
Yeah, there's been some myths. Sort of mainline media, mainstream media, are concentrating very much on the abolishment of Section 21s, but the bill goes beyond that. And I think everyone's getting so sort of fixated with the abolishment of Section 21s, and they're reading the headlines and not realising there's detail behind it. So what we thought to do today is really just talk about the 6 main points of the bill.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
And then basically just try and put some context to it, just give it some detail, so that we all know where we're at. There is more. I mean, it's important to understand the bill's in its very early stages at the moment. So
it's a moving beast, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. More will come out. It's had its first reading. The second reading is scheduled for the 9th of October. After that, it goes into a committee stage, then it goes to a reporting stage, then it goes to a third reading, then it repeats itself in the House of Lords. Exactly the same process, and then it comes back to the House of Commons, and it's got a consideration stage, and then it assumes royal assent. Now, that seems relatively quick, but you've got to remember there's party conferences going on at the moment. Then there's shutdown for Christmas. There's other pieces of legislation that are being dealt with by the government as well. So this has to slot in. Yeah. So it could be with us summer next year. Only yesterday there were industry experts that saying it could take another 2 years. Yeah. We simply do not know.
There's a lot of elements for them to pull together, Paul, aren't there? But
huge amounts. Yeah.
The 6 main points that we're going to kind of focus on today, which really seem to be fairly hot in the press, is number 1. You've already mentioned it, Paul. The abolishment of the Section 21. Number 2, strengthening of tenants' rights. A little bit of a hot topic in some ways, but probably blown a little bit out of proportion, really. Number 3, which is pets in lets. Yep. Number 4, decent home standards. Number 5, Awaab's law. I know we mentioned that on the webinar, but for those that didn't attend, we will go into a little bit more on that. And then also the last one, which is a little bit more under the radar, I suppose, is digital database and property ombudsman. So, Paul, why don't we kick off with number 1, being the abolishment of Section 21. So, first of all, I suppose maybe for some landlords, they might not actually know what a Section 21 was in terms of what is a Section 21 and the removal of it, I suppose, really. Yeah.
So Section 21 was introduced in the Housing Act. It's an apparatus that is used. It's a mandatory possession notice. So if you wanted to get possession of your property for any reason other than a breach that was covered under grounds 1 to 17 under Schedule 2 of the Housing Act, you can use a Section 21 notice. Now, the format of Section 21 has changed. It changed a little bit in COVID, then it's gone back again. But principally, it's a 2-month notice that you serve on your tenant during a periodic basis, or you can serve it after 4 months of the fixed term to end the tenancy at the end of the fixed term. But it's a mandatory notice, means that you can get possession of your property. If the tenants don't abide by the notice and don't give you the required possession, it's a simple process of what's called accelerated possession proceedings, where you can fill out some documentation, send that to the local county court. That there's no hearing required unless a hardship case is called, but the judge would rubber stamp it, and then you get your possession order, which you can ask the local bailiff to enforce as is required. That's been there for a long time. Yep. There has been a lot of talk of being a no-fault eviction. It's not an eviction notice, it's a possession notice. And there's been a lot of talk by pro-tenant groups who have kind of swayed government in that landlords are using this to remove tenants willy-nilly. Well, it's utterly ridiculous. I don't know why a landlord would want to remove a tenant who's paying their rent. because the landlord's renting it for a reason. It just seems daft, but that's the way it is. So that's basically the Section 21 notice. Now, what the Renters' Rights Bill, we'll call that the bill from going on because it's such a bit of a mouthful. What the bill is proposing to do is to abolish Section 21. You will not be able to issue that notice to secure possession of your property. However, what they are going to do is essentially beef up Schedule 2 of the Housing Act, which basically provides you with more grounds in which to get possession.
So Paul, what kind of give us an example, because of first of all, it's for landlords, and understandably you think, oh crikey, that's a hell of a change, but I think you're probably going to go on anyway in your you're in your vibe, but go on to just mention a couple of ways which you will most likely still be able to serve a notice to gain possession of your property, basically.
Sure. So we find that the main reason a landlord would want to issue a Section 21 is if, for instance, they want to sell the property. They want to sell it with vacant possession. They have no interest in selling it with tenant in situ as an investment. They want to sell it as vacant possession, or they want to move back in. Now, government has listened to that, and what they have created is a mandatory ground which a landlord can serve to secure possession of the property on the basis that you want to sell it or you want to move back in. Let's concentrate on the first one, wanting to sell, because that's the most common one. With Section 21, you used to be able to say, okay, I would like to sell my property. If it's periodic, I'll serve my 2 months notice. If it's fixed, I'll serve my notice to end at the end of the fixed term. Now, assume your tenant moves in today, for example, and the bill's active, you wouldn't be able to serve this notice to secure possession to sell your property for the first 12 months of that tenancy.
Right.
The first 12 months of that tenancy is protected unless there is a breach. So if it's what they call landlord circumstance that you want to end the tenancy because you want to move back in or you want to sell it, you have to allow the first 12 months to go by. Then you can serve the notice, which is now a 4-month notice of your intention to secure possession to sell the property.
As opposed to the 2 months it was.
Yeah, the notice period has doubled. What is not entirely clear at the moment is whether you have to give the tenant the full 12 months of the tenancy and then serve the 4 months notice, or whether or not you can serve the 4 months notice after the initial 8 months of tenancy so that it ends after 12 months. So you have a protected 12 months. That's not quite sure yet. We need to get clarification on that. But that's basically how it works.
So if you wanted to use it for your own purposes, but say if you're if the tenant is continually kind of late with rent, they're in rent arrears, there will still be provisions in place to serve notice on this, obviously.
100%. So as it stands at the minute, we issue under ground 8, which is the mandatory possession. It's a mandatory ground for rent arrears, and you can issue that when the account reaches 2 months rent arrears, which essentially is day 32 because all rent is due in advance. So your tenant moves in the beginning of the month, doesn't pay their rent. The next month's rent is due. That's the point you can issue a Section 8 notice under ground 8, and that's a 2-week notice. What will happen now is that rather than you being able to serve notice at 2 months, the tenant has to be in 3 months rent arrears rather than 2. So that's another month's been added. So 3 months rent arrears. Right. And then you would serve the Section 8 notice, and the notice period for that has doubled from 2 to 4 weeks.
Right, yeah.
So you've gone from 2 months and 2 weeks notice to 3 months and 4 weeks notice. So the difference now is that you can't issue court proceedings until the account is principally 4 months in arrears.
Whilst we're on the subjects of courts there and that kind of thing, I think that may well be a massive point as to when this will come into force, Paul, because at the moment, as we've discussed over our few webinars that we've held now, the courts are suitably delayed. They're not getting any worse, but they're not getting any better. No. And obviously, if everything goes to what is a Section 8 at the moment, then everything would need to go to court.
Courts. Yeah, 100% has. So basically, with a Section 21, you don't have to go to court unless the tenant doesn't give you possession. Then you can do accelerated possession proceedings.
Yeah.
But when you issue a Section 8 notice, you have to go to court for the judge to enforce the notice. And X amount of those notices will be mandatory, which means the judge has to give you possession. The only discretion they have is the amount of time in which they give you possession. The rest are discretionary, which means the judge can make a decision based on the evidence given to him as to whether or not possession should be secured. Mm-hmm. At the moment, the whole process of changing this, going back to the Renters Reform Bill, was that they were going to delay the abolishment of Section 21s until they had reformed the courts, the county courts. Because you're absolutely right. As it stands, the county courts haven't caught up since COVID, essentially. There's so much pressure on them. Various courts have closed. So they've all been, for instance, our one now is everyone goes to Chelmsford, and they generally only have possession listings on a Monday. So you can imagine how busy that gets. Yeah. It's utterly ridiculous. Now, all of a sudden, if everybody now has to use that mechanism to get possession, it's going to go crazy. So the idea was, let's reform the courts first. Let's streamline the process because it's very backdated. It's awful. But the idea was create a digital process so that it's a lot better, so that things would run a lot smoother, and we'd be able to crack on. Unfortunately, what's happened is the incoming government decided, actually, no, we're going to go ahead and abolish Section 21. We'll get round to reforming the courts, but we're going to carry on with this first. So it's the wrong way round. Yeah. Like insuring your car once you've already crashed. They're dealing with the abolishment as a primary and the reform of the courts as secondary. But what they're not understanding is obviously the reform of the courts is the apparatus needed for the abolishment of the Section 21. Yeah. So it's going to be chaotic.
So do you think that as they get down the process, perhaps, Paul, they may they may kind of think, oh, crikey, we're not quite ready to bring this in yet. We need to do the courts first and actually maybe...
Very possible.
More. Yeah,
it's very possible. Back in 2019, before when the renters... when the tenant fee ban came out, in the early stages of the draft in that bill, they actually forgot to add that rent was a permitted payment. So the bill can change. This is the first reading. As it progresses, it's on its journey through the houses. There may be things that change. And in the Renters Reform, it's exactly the same. It's like Section 21 is going to go. And then as it progressed, they realised, actually, no, we need to reform the courts first. So we'll carry on with the bill, but we won't ban Section 21 to begin with. This may be the case. I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, I'm better than you sort of thing, where Labour are keen to get the abolishment of Section 21 because the Conservative Party took so long to do it. They're keen to show that it can be done and it can be done quickly. So we have to wait and see. But that is the primary concern in the bill in its current stage.
So that, I think we've kind of obviously we're supposed to be flying through this ball, but I think we've done we've talked about the Section 21s, and I think there is. I think landlords should really take some comfort in that there will still be ways in which you can get your property back, as long as I think you're managing the properties well and you know what's going on with the property at all times. That will only give you more powers to be able to serve a notice as and when you need to serve it. So I think it is important to make sure that you are keeping on top of everything associated with it, especially as everything goes to courts, and there's so many reasons in which notices get thrown out once it gets to court if you haven't got an up-to-date EPC, gas serve, or all of these kind of little things. So it is a real prudent thing to make sure that you are fully compliant with the current legislation before moving on to obviously renters' rights bills coming into place. But that's kind of abolishing Section 21 there on
which hasn't happened yet. It's still 100% valid.
Yeah,
you can still use it.
That. Absolutely, good point, Paul. Good point. Strengthening tenants' rights. Obviously, we've touched a little bit on that. But is there anything kind of major that people need to be aware of that is strengthening those tenants' rights at all, Paul? At all?
Yeah. So they are looking to abolish bidding. They call them bidding wars. So if you're marketing your property for £1,200, sometimes you'll see tenants offering more to a landlord because they're desperate for the property. And as we know, there's this distinct shortage of properties on the market at the moment. So it's not bidding war as such, because landlords don't create these bidding wars. It's the tenants offering the money because they want to live in the property. That will become unlawful. So you can only charge what the property is on the market for.
Do you think that might end up being that people or landlords and such like put the properties on at a slightly higher guide price and invite offers on that? So say something that maybe is on the market at the moment at what would it be now, £1,000 a month. They might go, you know what, put it out at £1,150 and offer and see if you can get some interest at that level and some offers. Do you think they might do that, or not so much, Paul? Do you think?
It's, well, at the moment it says you can't. My understanding is the bidding war, you can't be looking to achieve more than the property is marketed for. So if you're prepared to receive less than the property is marketed for, I don't know. I don't know if that's an opportunity, but certainly what will happen is there will be less properties on the market, so you will definitely see rents rise.
Okay.
That's definitely going to happen. But so strengthening tenants' rights is one of those. Is obviously the banning of the bidding wars, which apparently is an issue. Not that I've ever heard of it, but apparently it's an issue. The other one is in terms of rent increases, giving the tenants the opportunity to argue a rent increase. So what's going to happen is rent increases can only happen once a year. And that's via a Section 13 notice, which is an active notice at the moment, which is served on a periodic tenancy, because all fixed-term tenancies won't exist. Everything will be periodic from day one, which means it rolls over month to month. Right. So you can do an annual rent review. No longer can you build in 6 monthly rent reviews. That will become unlawful. The extra rights given to the tenant is they can refer free of charge any request under a Section 13 to increase the rent to the first tier tribunal. Now, you can imagine, because it's free of charge, how many tenants who are wanting to pay an increased rent. There's nothing in it. You know, they may as well just refer it to the FTT, the first tier tribunal, because why wouldn't you? So what's going to happen is the FTT are going to be stacked with a ton of reviews. Now, currently what happens is if you issue a Section 13, you don't agree with it, you can refer it to a committee, but you have to pay the rent whilst that's being dealt with. What they're looking to do is that you don't have to pay that increased rent. You continue paying the rent that you paid until the FTT make adjudication. Now, at the moment, say for instance, your rent was £1,500. Yeah, the market value was 2,000. I said I'm going to increase it to 1,550. You refer it, and the committee says, well, that's massively under. You need to go to 1,750, and they will tell you to pay 1,750, even though I've said to you, you only need to pay 1,550, because they have the power to bring it to market value. Right. First tier tribunal will only bring it to the point that the Section 13 value. So if I said 1,550, they will only take it to 1,550. Right.
So they won't overvalue it. They'll only value it there or less, basically.
So it's vitally important that landlords, when they do these annual rent reviews, they need to consider their position, they need to consider the market rent, and they need to increase the rent to the value that they need rather than down value, because that's it. Once it's done, it's done. So and the FTT can refer or can defer the referral from the tenant for another 2 months if the tenant claims hardship. If they feel that the rent increase will cause the tenant hardship, they can sit in it for 2 months. But basically, the new rent doesn't take place until the FTT adjudicate, and then it takes place on the next rental due date. So if you issue a rent review today, it's the anniversary, and they're stacked up, you might not get that rent for another 6 months.
Right. You mentioned something right at the start of this little bit, Paul, which I think that is important just to bring up that whilst we're chatting about it, which was no fixed term tenancies. I know that we were just chatting there as if we know that off the top of the head, but that is a big fundamental change as well within this this bill, is that you won't have a fixed term tenancy. So touch on that briefly, Paul. We won't do on
so standard practice now is you issue what's called an assured short hold tenancy, abbreviated to an AST, and you would issue that generally between 6 and 12 months. Most tenants require 12 months tenancy. That is a fixed period. So you have the luxury and the knowledge that that tenant is going to be in that property for that fixed period of time.
Yeah.
After that, you can either renew the tenancy for another fixed period, or you can allow it to revert to what's called a contractual periodic tenancy, which is periodic, where it rolls over month to month. All the terms and conditions of the tenancy agreement remain the same. The principal difference being is that the tenant can serve 1 month's notice to vacate, and the landlord serves 2 months' notice to vacate. So it gives either party a bit of flexibility.
Yeah.
What will happen is, once the bill achieves royal assent, all tenancies will be periodic. There will be no fixed term. So essentially, that tenant can move into the property on a Monday, and if they were so inclined, they could serve notice on the Tuesday to leave the property. And that notice, I believe, is to 2 months to vacate.
Could be good if you want to go spend the holidays down in Cornwall, couldn't it? You could take up a tenancy on the first of July.
I mean, don't forget deposits still exist.
Yeah,
but yes, so the thought process behind it is the thought process behind it being that it gives the tenant the opportunity to remove themselves from a contract where the landlord isn't adhering to the terms of the contract.
Yeah.
So if the property wasn't up to the required state, at the moment, the tenant can't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. They're in a fixed term tenancy agreement, and they're relying on the landlord to deal with said maintenance, which the majority of landlords will. But there's a small element who won't, and they will hold the tenant to the fixed term. So by creating a periodic tenancy, it gives the tenant the opportunity to go, okay, well, you're not living up to, or you're not sort of dealing with your end of the bargain. I'm off.
Yeah.
Now, in reality, is that going to work? Well, we all know there's a massive shortage of properties. We all know we get something like 15 applications per property that goes on the market if it's a nice property. So there isn't going to be an abundance of properties that tenants can just dart around here, there, and everywhere. So the reality of it is tenants aren't going. They're grateful they're able to secure a property.
Yeah.
So you're not going to see many people moving in and then moving out again. You've got other costs to consider. You've got moving costs. You've got the rent and deposit that you paid. So it's there as a mechanism to allow tenants to move on. I'd imagine it will only be used if the landlords don't look after the properties.
Okay. Any other items that you feel are worth in this kind of initial kind of webinar? Anything else to note on strengthening tenants' rights?
Yeah, I'll gabble through them quickly because this was supposed to be a quick boom. So you got pets. So there will be requirements. So when you market in a property, you can market it with no pets, but once a tenant is in situ, they have the right to request a pet, and you can't just say no. You have to give an explanation as to why they can't have pets, and it has to be an acceptable explanation. What acceptable is, we don't know yet, but it could be something like the head lease doesn't allow it. It might be something you're allergic and you're looking to move back in, etc., etc. But it needs to be acceptable. Now, in line with that, there looks to be a requirement for the tenant to take out pet insurance, and it looks like that will actually be implied within the contract. So if a tenant has a pet, then doesn't have the pet insurance, arguably that's a breach of contract, which means you could look to get possession. So that's that one.
Pets, big kind of broad. It hasn't mentioned anything in terms of size of pets, type of pets, or anything like that.
No,
because that's a can of worms in itself, isn't it, Paul?
100%. We need to define what a pet is, and you wouldn't have a Great Dane if you got a one-bed flat. And the landlord can say no. So it needs to be, common sense needs to be applied. And I think if you can apply common sense and you're justifying rather than just going, no, I don't want you to have one, then it's fine. It's not an issue. It's just more paperwork. That's all, because all of this has to be documented. So that's PES. You then got the incorporation of the Decent Home Standard, which is a piece of legislation basically ensuring that a property is hazard-free and safe. Very quickly, if you don't adhere to that, it's a £7,000 fine. So that has to be looked at. And then we touched on Awaab's law in our last webinar. That basically brings in a structure, a time structure for dealing with maintenance. So rather than saying, yeah, I'll get around to that when I'm down there next, the clock starts ticking as soon as the tenant reports a maintenance issue. You have to deal with it within, I think it's 14 days to investigate, and then another 7 days to repair and keep the tenant updated throughout. Otherwise, that's a breach, and that's another fine. And then very quickly, lastly, is the digital database and the new ombudsman. Now, all letting agents have to subscribe to an ombudsman. What they're looking to do is to extend that to a landlord, and they're also looking to create a digital landlord database. So a landlord would need to register with this database. And if that landlord breaches legislation, that can be registered on the database. So essentially, a tenant can go onto the database, check, is this landlord good? Have they got any breaches against them? And then they can make an informed decision as to whether or not they rent the property. The ombudsman will also be there to adjudicate any claims that a tenant may have against the landlord, but also understand that landlords against tenants, but more information needs to come out on that.
That's quite a if that is quite good, because there are some cowboy kind of landlords out there that aren't doing things correctly, and I think that is actually a good improvement in terms of for tenants not being stuck in a way.
If it's governed correctly. That's the key thing. So all of this will be governed by the local authorities. So the local authorities will need to have a budget. At the moment, they don't have the budget. The EICRs, when they come, they're supposed to be governed by the local authority. And as you remember, they used to send the reports back to us and say, don't send them to us because there's no one here to deal with them. So as long as it is governed correctly and the local authorities are funded accordingly, then yes, it will remove the cowboy landlords.
Paul, we kind of very quickly touched on the Decent Home Standard, but there was a fine of potential £7,000 fine, and may face prosecution on that. So I just wanted to maybe just bring us back to there briefly, just to reiterate the point on there, which is provide rental homes will need to be safe and hazard free. Do we know any more kind of details on that at all?
Not specifically. You got HHSRS, which is already in place, which has the 29 checkpoints for the local authority to go and check that there are no hazards and it's safe. Finer detail needs to come out to say specifically what is safe. So we need guidance notes. And normally what happens is the government issues the guidance notes shortly before the bill becomes active. But as I say, probably more information as the bill journeys, as it makes its way through the houses, more information will come out to us.
So it might be more of an abbreviation of HSSRS rather than
possibly. It might cover things that's not covered in HHSRS and cover things. So there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there is, and these are just 6 points that have been kind of the hot topics in the media as such. There's I'm sure there's plenty of other bits in the bill that we're learning about on a daily and weekly basis, aren't we, Paul? I know that you're leading in terms of absorbing all knowledge that can come from solicitors, from the government, from all sources, and kind of we're breaking down the main meat to then obviously bring it to you guys at home to listen to, basically.
There's a lot. There's 226 pages of the actual bill. That does include Scotland and Wales as well, but it's a meaty piece of legislation. So there is a lot to go through. And we will basically just, as as it journeys its way through the houses, more information will come out, and we'll just fire out blogs and updates as to what we find, and perhaps do another webinar once a bit more information has come out. It is a massive change. It's the biggest change in 30 years. It does create more paperwork. It means that landlords can't now just let a property to a tenant and sit back and just allow the tenant to run the tenancy and collect the rent, and that's it. It requires a landlord to be far more proactive and actively manage that property, or appoint an agent to actively manage that property. Otherwise, it will come back and bite them on the bottom.
Well, thanks for sitting down with me today, Paul. It's been really insightful, and yeah, as you say, I think we will do updates on this as and when it kind of progresses to the next stage, and we get any more information. We'll also be touching on them slightly with the general kind of quarterly webinars that we do. Our next one is in late November, so make sure you guys at home do book your slot on that. It'll be live at, I think it's 6 o'clock on the 28th, I believe, something like that.
Thursday night, I think it is, yeah.
So make sure you register for that, guys. And yeah, as I say, any questions, queries, please do give us a call or send us an email, and we'll be happy to help you out with anything that springs to mind. But thanks for that, Paul. Anything to add at all?
No, I think you've covered it. As I say, there's going to be lots of questions, and if you have them, I encourage you to contact us. We'll answer them as best we can.
Super. All right. Thanks, guys. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. All right. Cheers. Bye.
Yeah.